This is your tech news briefing for Friday, October 28th. I'm Zoe Thomas for the Wall Street Journal. All this week, we've been bringing you some of the most interesting and thought-provoking discussions from the Wall Street Journal's Tech Live conference. To wrap up the week, we recorded a special episode in front of a live audience outside in Laguna Beach, California. I sat down with WSJ Tech reporter Tim Higgins to discuss a key theme from the conference: why self-driving technology hasn't lived up to the hype, at least not as quickly as promised. Case in point, Intel spun out its self-driving car unit Mobileye this week, valuing it at $17 billion. That is more than it paid for the company, but far less than the $50 billion Intel had hoped for. So why have Mobileye and others in the autonomous driving space struggled? Here are highlights from that conversation with Tim. Tim, I want to start with Intel. Pat Gelsinger was here at Tech Live on Monday, and he was asked about the company's plans to spin out Mobileye. Intel brought Mobileye to an IPO at a significantly lower valuation than was expected. What went wrong?
Yeah, this is kind of maybe a canary in the coal mine, if you will, about the state of autonomous vehicle technology out there. Mobileye, it produces the kind of the brains for driver assist programs out there for vehicles, but also is working on fully self-driving technology. And they were hoping to IPO at a valuation of $50 billion, and now it's dramatically less. You've got an issue that the market for IPOs is just, it's a horrible time to be out there. But there's also concern among investors that I have talked to just about kind of the state of autonomous vehicle technology. Is this actually going to happen in the near term? And where does Mobileye play in that? You know, this is something, this kind of technology, not just Mobileye, but the state of driverless cars, we have been talking about it for more than a decade, and it's always kind of been something that was near term. It was just on the horizon, but it's proven time and time again to be harder than everybody initially anticipated. And I think some people's patience is waning for it.
Okay, then where does the state of driverless technology stand at the moment?
Well, it's not Knight Rider, you know, the famous self-driving car crime fighter.
Sure.
It's more nuanced and more limited. You can take a fully self-driving car in Phoenix right now using Waymo, which is Google's self-driving subsidiary. But, you know, this is limited. You can't go everywhere out there. And they're slowly rolling out this service. They're going to San Francisco, and they just announced Los Angeles. And what we've found, and what they have found, is that there's a huge back-end component to this technology. You gotta charge the vehicle. You gotta put windshield wiper fluid in. You gotta clean it out if somebody leaves their purse, or you know, they vomit in it or whatever. You got this huge infrastructure back there, which I tend to call the vomit problem, because you think the idea of when this technology was first talked about years ago was this is all going to be automated and robots are going to be taking over, and it was just going to be so easy, you could just deploy these things. Well, it actually requires an army of people behind the scenes to keep the logistics going, and that's one of the big surprises I think that the industry has dealt with in recent years, is trying to figure out that complexity.
You spoke with the Waymo co-CEO here at Tech Live on Monday. We actually have a clip of what she said in reaction to what it is to get these cars on the road.
This is really about being patient in the learning, but being very precise in our execution of what makes this a delightful service.
So a delightful service, do we have an idea of when they're going to be able to turn this into a more accessible, delightful service?
It's a city-by-city kind of problem for them. I mean, think about me as a driver. You can plop me down in Phoenix, or I can go to San Francisco or Los Angeles, and I can get off the plane and just start driving. But for them, their driver, which is how they call their service, has to be tuned for all those markets. It has to be trained. The infrastructure has to be built around it, and it's taking time to do that. So it's clear they're getting faster at it, but it's more than an engineering problem. We talked about logistics, but there's a political issue. In Phoenix, they were able to easily roll out, or they rolled it out. But in California, there's a level of bureaucracies involved that they have to have permissions from various places, and that takes time.
You know, that's such a good point. And Pat Gelsinger, who was also here at Tech Live, he spoke about that a little bit when he talked about IPOing Mobileye. I think we have a clip from him on regulation as well.
many other cities and countries around the world are much more advanced in the regulatory policies enabling autonomous vehicles, to emerge more rapidly. And clearly, to me, not only do we need things like Chips and Science Act to move things forward, but we also need regulatory policies to enable technologies to come forward.
So Tim, does that gel with what you've been hearing from other autonomous driving companies?
It's interesting. For years, writing about this, there's always been this belief that self-driving technology would have an easier time deploying in China just because the government could turn it on if they wanted to. It's not necessarily the case for U.S. companies, given that these are essentially mobile map-making machines, and there's concerns about national security there. So you go market to market, there's different complexities and there's different logistical hurdles, if you will. Here in the States, the challenge has been traditionally the federal government oversees the car and the states oversee the driver. And so the question becomes, when the car is the driver, who's in charge there? A company like Waymo would like it to be at a federal level, so you can have one rule to rule it all here in the States, where we're still kind of in early days of local governments deciding how they want to weigh in.
What does that regulatory environment and this kind of maybe slower development than expected mean for investors in this space?
It's all kind of that level of complexity and risk that just increases. We saw in 2018 the first death of a person involved, was hit by a self-driving car in Phoenix area by Uber at the time. And that really put the industry back. It all of a sudden shook a lot of people who said, if it wasn't already clear, we are dealing with life and death technology. And that gives people some pause. How do you know if the system works? How do you know if the car that's being put on the road is safe?
Tim Higgins, WSJ reporter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it for Tech News Briefing this week. Our producer is Julie Chang, our supervising producer is Chris Zinsley, and I'm your host, Zoe Thomas. Thanks for listening and have a great weekend.